He grabbed the rifle of a Queen's Guard. And this is what happened next. Welcome to our channel where unforgettable stories come to life. We're so glad you're here, and we can't wait to share today's incredible tale with you. As you watch, let us know where you're tuning in from, whether it's a cozy corner of your home or somewhere across the world. Drop a comment below and let's connect. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on our next special story, coming tomorrow. Get ready for an unforgettable journey. We're just getting started. The summer air in London shimmered under the intense midday sun. Hundreds of tourists swarmed around Buckingham Palace, buzzing like bees, snapping photos and waving excitedly at the stoic figures standing behind the ornate black and gold gates. The iconic palace, a symbol of British history and tradition, stood majestic against the blue sky. Among the crowd stood Sergeant Jack Davis, a 36-year-old seasoned veteran of the U.S. Army. Unlike the laughing and excited tourists around him, Sergeant Davis stood motionless, embodying a sense of unwavering discipline and duty. His eyes, sharp and focused, scanned the surrounding area, never wavering, never blinking. His posture was perfect, the ceremonial rifle gripped tightly in his hands. The weight of history and tradition rested on his shoulders. Behind the stoic exterior, however, lay a man who had seen more than most. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Syria, each mission leaving its mark. His scars, both visible and hidden, had shaped him into the disciplined figure standing before the gates of Buckingham Palace. His face, etched with the lines of time and battle, told stories of sacrifice and resilience. To most, he was just another guard, standing still for hours in the harsh sunlight, seemingly impervious to the world around him. But for Sergeant Davis, this was not just a ceremonial post. It was a testament to a lifetime of service and honor. Each step, each motion, every breath was a reminder of the sacrifices made. In a world that seemed to forget honor more with each passing day, Sergeant Davis stood as a symbol of that very honor. He was a living connection to a time when duty meant something more than just a job. It was a calling. The tourists, with their cameras raised high, didn't understand the weight of the moment. They didn't see the quiet strength in Sergeant Davis's stance or the pride that came with serving in the Queen's Guard. All they saw was a man standing still, part of the iconic image of Buckingham Palace, the same figure they'd seen in countless photos and postcards. They didn't realize that behind the guard's silent stare was a man who had given much, who had fought on foreign soil, and who now stood at the center of tradition. In contrast, there was Trevor, a 34-year-old former wrestler turned viral prankster just arriving at Heathrow. His flight had been delayed, his patience was thin, and his need for content was insatiable. Scrolling through TikTok on his phone, he saw yet another viral clip. This one showing a Queen's Guard laughing. With a smirk on his face, he thought, "This is too easy." Trevor was no stranger to creating chaos for the sake of views. His brand was built on pushing boundaries and challenging authority, all in the name of entertainment. His confidence was sky high, fueled by caffeine and an inflated sense of invincibility. He turned to his friend Kyle, who had been filming his every move. "All right," Trevor said. "Here's the plan. Let's mess with their heads. I'm going to do what nobody else dares. I'm grabbing the rifle." Kyle hesitated. His brow furrowed. "Man, that's like illegal or something, right?" Trevor laughed it off. "Come on, they're statues, bro. It's all an act. Let's see if they're real soldiers or just costumes." And so, with his mind set on making a viral moment, Trevor made his way toward Buckingham Palace, his energy brash and his intentions reckless. The crowd parted slightly as he approached, but they had seen it all before, people trying to provoke the guards for a laugh. What made Trevor's presence different, though, was his arrogance. His every movement screamed entitlement, and the tourists began to take notice. They watched, some amused, others curious, as Trevor began his antics, making faces, waving his hand in front of Davis's face, even pretending to stumble into him. Yet through it all, Sergeant Davis remained still. He did not flinch. He did, not react. The heat bore down, the crowd grew, but he stood unshaken. Trevor, undeterred, escalated his actions. His pride began to swell with each failed provocation. And then, in one bold move, he reached out and grabbed the barrel of Sergeant Davis's ceremonial rifle. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. The tourists gasped. Parents pulled their children closer, unsure of what was happening. Phones began to flash, capturing the scene for the internet to devour. The tension in the air was palpable, and it seemed as if the very essence of tradition was being tested. Sergeant Davis, trained for moments like this, reacted instantly. Without a word, he jerked the rifle back in one swift motion, snapping Trevor's hand off it. But Trevor wasn't done. His ego, bruised by the guard's lack of reaction, pushed him further. He lunged forward again, grabbing the rifle with both hands, pulling hard. This time, the line between performance and real danger was crossed. The situation had gone from a prank to a serious threat, and Sergeant Davis, now not just a guard, but a soldier, had to act. The air grew heavier as Trevor, now more determined than ever, closed the distance between himself and Sergeant Jack Davis. He could feel the eyes of the tourists on him, their stares like a mix of curiosity and amusement. Trevor smirked to himself, basking in the attention. This was his moment, the viral content he so desperately craved. He thought back to the millions of views he'd gotten for his previous pranks, the endless applause, the sponsorships, the fame. He felt untouchable, as if he could do anything and get away with it. But this was different. There was something about Sergeant Davis that made Trevor's usual bravado feel like a weak imitation. The guard's stillness, his silence, it was unnerving. Trevor had pushed the boundaries before, but never like this. The thought of grabbing the rifle crossed his mind again, and the challenge of breaking the guard's stoic expression became too tempting to resist. He was confident, maybe too confident. Without a second thought, Trevor lunged forward, his hand outstretched toward the ceremonial rifle. The sound of the crowd faded as he focused on the weapon. It was all part of his plan, right? Just a harmless prank. He grinned, imagining how many followers would be impressed by his boldness. But as his fingers brushed against the barrel of the rifle, the world seemed to slow down. Time stretched. Sergeant Davis's eyes never wavered. But in that brief moment of contact, his body tensed. He didn't move, not a single muscle, but something in his posture shifted. It wasn't fear. It was control. It was calculated. As Trevor's hand gripped the rifle tighter, expecting a reaction, any reaction from the guard, the stillness of the moment crushed him. The grip of the rifle tightened against Trevor's hand as Sergeant Davis, without missing a beat, snapped the weapon back with terrifying precision. Trevor recoiled, his grip broken in an instant. The force of the movement sent a shock through his body, and his ego cracked. This wasn't just a prank. Something inside Trevor shifted from arrogance to disbelief. But instead of retreating, his bruised pride pushed him further. The cameras were still rolling. The crowd was still watching. And Trevor, desperate to save face, lunged forward again. This time, with both hands, he grabbed hold of the rifle, pulling with all his might. A low murmur swept through the crowd. People could feel the shift. What started as a simple act of provocation had escalated. Trevor had crossed the line. The situation was no longer a joke. Sergeant Davis stood firm, his eyes locked ahead, but there was no mistaking the tension that now rippled through him. The movement of Trevor's hands on the rifle triggered an instinctual response. This wasn't about tradition anymore. This was about protecting the people and the honor of his post. Sergeant Davis shifted his weight, his muscles moving with the precision of a soldier, not a statue. The speed at which he moved was almost mechanical. Trevor's hands still gripped the rifle, but his strength couldn't match the guard's. In a heartbeat, Sergeant Davis pivoted and twisted his body, using Trevor's force against him. The rifle was torn from Trevor's grip with such precision that it was almost poetic. In its execution, the crowd held their breath. Trevor's hand was empty, his body still stumbling from the unexpected force. But Sergeant Davis didn't stop there. He didn't just disarm Trevor. With one swift, terrifying motion, he moved into Trevor's personal space. The speed at which he closed the distance was almost too fast for the eye to follow. Sergeant Davis pressed the stock of the rifle firmly into Trevor's chest, not with the intent to harm, but to push him back. It was a controlled, non-lethal strike, a perfect example of military precision. Trevor stumbled backward, his legs giving way beneath him as he crashed to the ground. The sound of his body hitting the stone pavement echoed through the courtyard. The tourists, who moments ago were eagerly filming, now stood frozen. No one cheered. No one laughed. The tension in the air was thick. The silence that followed was deafening. Sergeant Davis stood tall, rifle back in position, unwavering. His expression didn't change. His mission was clear: protect, uphold tradition, and stand firm. Trevor lay on the ground, stunned not just by the fall but by the humiliation of being outclassed in every sense. His pride, now shattered, burned deeper than any bruise. He opened his mouth to shout, to demand an explanation, but the words died in his throat. The world around him seemed to pull away, and all he could do was groan in disbelief. It wasn't over yet. Captain Brian Carter, flanked by 2 palace officers, moved in swiftly, their steps firm and purposeful. Trevor was still on the ground, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't the one in control. "Stand down," Captain Carter's voice rang out, commanding and authoritative. "You are under arrest for assaulting a ceremonial guard in service to the crown." The words hit Trevor like a freight train. His arrogance, his sense of superiority, all of it drained away. He froze, hands raised in submission. The reality of what he had done, the consequences, were too much to ignore. As the officers cuffed him, the tourists watched in stunned silence. Trevor had learned a harsh lesson that day. Sergeant Davis hadn't just stood his ground. He had defended the very essence of tradition of duty with honor. The world would soon learn that you don't mock history, and you certainly don't mess with a man who stands guard over it. The crowd held its collective breath as Trevor struggled to regain his footing, his pride wounded more than his body. The stone pavement beneath him felt cold and unforgiving, mirroring the icy wave of reality that washed over him. His hands, now empty of the rifle, ached, but it was the sting of humiliation that hit hardest. The sudden shift from invincibility to defeat left him dazed, as if the world had knocked the arrogance right out of him. But Trevor wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. His mind raced, still driven by the rush of adrenaline and the belief that he could somehow salvage the situation. He scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with rage and embarrassment, eyes darting around for an escape. The tourists who had once been on his side now stared at him in disbelief. Phones still captured every moment, but it wasn't the footage he'd imagined. He hadn't just failed in his prank. He'd failed to see the gravity of the moment. "Come on, man," Trevor shouted, his voice breaking the tension in the air. "This is just a joke. It's all for fun." His words hung in the air, but they fell flat. There was no laughter, no amused onlookers, only silence, only judgment. Sergeant Jack Davis remained unmoved, his rifle now back in position, his body a picture of composure and unwavering discipline. He didn't engage with Trevor's words, didn't even flinch at the insult. The crowd could see it now. Sergeant Davis was no longer just a guard. He was the embodiment of honor and duty. Trevor was a spectacle, a flash of ego that had momentarily flickered in the face of true discipline. Before Trevor could utter another word, the sharp voice of Captain Brian Carter cut through the quiet, commanding authority that shook the air. "Stand down, Cole," he barked. His footsteps echoed as he approached, flanked by 2 palace officers, their uniforms crisp and their movements sharp. The crowd instinctively parted to make way for the officers, who had been trained to act swiftly, with no room for hesitation in situations like this. Trevor froze. The cocky, self-assured man who had walked into Buckingham Palace moments ago was now paralyzed, caught in the sudden weight of his own arrogance. He raised his hands, but there was no bravado in the gesture. The sharpness in Captain Carter's voice left him no room for argument. "You are under arrest," Captain Carter continued, his tone as cold as steel, "for assaulting a ceremonial guard in service to the crown. You'll come with us now." The words hit Trevor like a sledgehammer. He had crossed a line that had nothing to do with a joke, with content, or with followers. This was real, and the consequences were far more severe than he had anticipated. Trevor's face turned a shade of crimson, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words, but nothing came out. He wanted to fight back, to argue that it was just a prank, that it wasn't supposed to go this far. But deep down, he knew the truth. It was no longer about what he thought was funny. It was about the respect he had disrespected, the history he had mocked, and the honor he had tarnished. "You think honor is a joke?" Captain Carter's words sliced through the confusion, leaving Trevor speechless. His hands were cuffed with a swift, professional motion. The officers didn't look at him with sympathy, only duty. As they led him away, the crowd finally exhaled in unison, the tension dissipating like smoke in the wind. Sergeant Davis stood tall, his expression unchanged. The moment of confrontation had passed, but his job wasn't over. He resumed his post, as if nothing had happened, eyes scanning the horizon. His posture perfect, his presence unwavering. For Sergeant Davis, this was just another day, another challenge in a life defined by duty. The crowd had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a guard reacting to a threat, but a man standing firm in the face of provocation, a soldier who understood the weight of his role. As the officers escorted Trevor toward the palace gates, a hush fell over the tourists. Some had their phones out, still recording, but now the footage was not of a viral prank. It was of a lesson learned the hard way. The narrative had shifted. Trevor Cole, the prankster, had become a cautionary tale. The viral video that would soon spread across the internet wasn't about laughter. It was about respect, tradition, and the consequences of arrogance. In that moment, Sergeant Davis wasn't just protecting his post. He was protecting something far bigger, a symbol of honor, duty, and history. The Queen's Guard wasn't just an image. It was a living testament to the values that had endured for centuries. And as the last of the tourists wandered off, their gazes lingering on the quiet guard, a sense of respect began to settle over the courtyard. Something Trevor Cole could never have predicted. The crowd stood frozen in a thick, stunned silence. Trevor, still reeling from the forceful disarmament, had barely processed what had just happened. His mind was a whirlwind, spinning between disbelief, humiliation, and regret. He had walked into Buckingham Palace with nothing more than the ambition for viral fame, but now his life had been completely upended. His arrogance had pushed him too far, and there was no turning back. As the officers led Trevor away, his body stiff, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment, the tourists slowly began to murmur among themselves. Phones continued to record, but now the footage wasn't a joke. It was a stark moment of reality. People had witnessed something they hadn't expected. They had expected laughter. They had expected a guard to break character, to show emotion, to make the viral clip. They had all been waiting for. But what they saw instead was a masterclass in discipline, a moment of authority and strength that transcended mere performance. Sergeant Jack Davis, in the blink of an eye, had turned from an immobile figure into a force of quiet, unwavering power. The crowd's initial curiosity, their amusement, had shifted to awe and respect. The Queen's Guard was no longer just a figure behind a gate. He had shown them that the strength behind the silence was far greater than anything they had ever imagined. But there was no time for celebration, no moment of victory for Sergeant Davis. His role was far from over. He had stood his ground, yes, but now the responsibility of what had happened loomed large. His instincts had been right, and yet the consequences of the incident were still unfolding. This wasn't just a viral video. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a pivotal moment in the public's understanding of what it meant to wear the uniform of the Queen's Guard. It was an awakening. For those who had mocked, who had misunderstood the sacred duty behind the red uniforms and black bearskin hats. As the officers escorted Trevor toward the palace gates, Captain Brian Carter turned to Sergeant Davis, his gaze piercing through the air. He didn't need to say a word. The weight of the situation was felt in the look they shared. Captain Carter had seen countless moments like this, but something about the way Sergeant Davis had handled the situation had struck him. It was more than just procedure. It was a lesson in restraint, in strength, in dignity. The tourists began to disperse, whispering to one another, replaying the scene in their minds. Some seemed genuinely shaken, their laughter from moments earlier replaced with contemplation. Many had come to see a simple show of ceremony, to snap a few pictures, but what they witnessed was far more than they bargained for. Sergeant Davis hadn't just defended his post, he had defended an ideal. By now, the footage was spreading across the internet faster than anyone could have predicted. On TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, clips of the altercation were posted from every angle. Headlines screamed, "Royal Guard defends post against reckless tourist." The story spread quickly, and the public's reaction was swift. While some sided with Trevor, claiming he was just trying to have a little fun, the overwhelming majority stood firmly with Sergeant Davis. The narrative had shifted from a prank to something deeper, a symbol of respect, tradition, and the consequences of underestimating the values that had stood the test of time. Within an hour, news outlets were calling it a national lesson in respect. Opinion pieces flooded the pages of online newspapers, reflecting on what Sergeant Davis had done. Experts weighed in, calling his reaction a textbook example of controlled restraint. Military veterans praised his poise, while others argued that it was a reminder of the importance of understanding the role of ceremonial figures like the Queen's Guard and the unspoken power they carried. Meanwhile, Trevor's world was unraveling. YouTube had already demonetized his channel, and sponsors were dropping him like a hot potato. His social media posts were flooded with mocking comments, calling him out for thinking that his stunt would go unpunished. His attempt at going viral had backfired in a way he couldn't have imagined. His apology video only made things worse, turning him into an even bigger target for ridicule. Sergeant Davis, on the other hand, remained unaffected by the chaos swirling around him. He didn't seek the limelight. His work wasn't about headlines or social media applause. It was about duty, about standing firm, about defending something far larger than himself. As the officers finished processing Trevor outside the gates, Sergeant Davis stood silently, his gaze forward as if nothing had happened. The image of the unshakable guard, the unwavering symbol of British tradition, was now ingrained in the public's consciousness. The Queen's Guard, in that brief but monumental moment, had reminded the world why tradition was sacred, and why, sometimes the silent warriors were the ones who held the most power. As the days passed, the incident at Buckingham Palace continued to ripple across the internet, becoming a flashpoint for discussions about tradition, respect, and authority. Trevor Cole, once a viral prankster with thousands of followers, had become the subject of ridicule, his arrogance now a punchline in countless memes and viral videos. His career, built on shocking stunts and unpredictable content, was unraveling before his eyes. Sponsors dropped him. Advertisers distanced themselves. The humiliation was so public it was impossible to escape. He tried to spin the incident in his favor, posting a tearful apology video, but that only backfired. The apology became another viral spectacle, the comments more scathing than ever. Meanwhile, Sergeant Jack Davis had returned to his post at Buckingham Palace, the very image of composure. The world had seen his discipline, his quiet strength, but he didn't seek praise or recognition. To him, the job had always been about duty, about upholding a legacy that had stood the test of, he had done what was necessary, no more, no less. The footage of the incident had gone viral, yes, but to Sergeant Davis, the attention was fleeting. It was the duty that mattered. And that was what he had protected. But the world had noticed. News outlets around the world reported on the incident. Commentators praised his controlled response, calling it a textbook example of military restraint. Ex-soldiers weighed in, applauding his swift action and the way he had handled the escalating situation. "This is why we do what we do," one veteran said in an interview. "We protect more than just a building. We protect respect. We protect history." Captain Brian Carter, who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand, shared the sentiment. He stood with Sergeant Davis after the incident, a quiet pride in his eyes. He had seen countless guards at Buckingham Palace, but none had handled a threat with the same precision, the same calm authority. He didn't just protect the palace, Captain Carter told reporters. He protected the very essence of what the Queen's Guard represents: duty, honor, restraint. In a world that increasingly forgets these things, Sergeant Davis reminded us all of their value. Within a week, the effects of the incident were clear. Public opinion had swung heavily in favor of Sergeant Davis. Support for his actions surged, with over 80% of the public expressing approval of how he handled the situation. Meanwhile, Trevor's online presence became a cautionary tale. Videos circulated of his fall from grace, with one clip after another showing his attempts to justify his actions, only to be met with backlash. The world had turned on him, and he had no one to blame but himself. The media frenzy was just beginning. Documentaries were planned, analyzing the confrontation from every angle. News outlets picked apart the footage, breaking down every second of the incident, analyzing the way Sergeant Davis had responded with precision, the way he had swiftly neutralized the threat without overreacting. The story became about more than just the guard. It was about a cultural clash between the viral, attention-seeking world of online content and the quiet, steadfast tradition of military service. Trevor's world continued to crumble. He had become a symbol of disrespect, a warning to others who might think it was acceptable to mock the very symbols of authority that had been built over centuries. And as his life spiraled, the press turned its attention to the man who had stood firm, the man who had become the face of tradition, Sergeant Jack Davis. Amid the noise of media interviews, viral videos, and public outcry, Sergeant Davis remained as he always had, quiet, composed, and unflinching. But then something extraordinary happened. An unprecedented event was scheduled at Buckingham Palace, a ceremony to honor Sergeant Davis for his discipline, his bravery, and his unwavering commitment to duty. The Queen's Guard, standing in full dress uniform, lined up in the grand courtyard, the Union Jack fluttering proudly overhead. The ceremony was to be broadcast live, and thousands of civilians, veterans, and tourists filled the courtyard. Children stood at attention, their eyes wide with respect. The air was thick with anticipation. Captain Carter took the stage first, his voice carrying across the crowd. In the face of provocation, in the face of disrespect, Sergeant Jack Davis stood unflinchingly. He did not flinch. He did not waver. He embodied the very spirit of what it means to be a soldier. We present to you, Sergeant Davis, the Royal Commendation of Valor. The crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't just a recognition of one man's actions. It was a moment of collective reflection on the values that had been protected for centuries. The ceremony wasn't just about Sergeant Davis. It was about the importance of honor, tradition, and respect in a world that sometimes forgets them. Sergeant Davis stepped forward, his face calm, his posture straight. He accepted the medal without a word, saluting with the same precision he had shown in the confrontation. The applause continued, but the guard remained still, his eyes focused ahead. He wasn't there for the accolades. He was there because it was his duty. And as the ceremony came to a close, the final words were spoken. Honor isn't silent. It speaks through action. The tourists who had once mocked the guards now looked at them with a newfound respect. The story of Sergeant Davis had reshaped their understanding of what it meant to wear the uniform. The silent warriors of Buckingham Palace had not just defended the gates. They had defended the soul of a nation. Thank you for watching today's story. What an incredible journey it's been. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the events we just witnessed. What do you think about Sergeant Jack Davis's actions? Was his response exactly what the situation needed? Or do you believe Trevor Cole's stunt was just harmless fun, even if it crossed the line? Let us know where you stand in the comments below. Do you think we should have more stories like this, where we dive deep into the values of tradition, discipline, and respect. Maybe you've had experiences of your own where you've seen respect tested or earned. Share them with us. We're always looking for new perspectives and conversations. Also, if you found this video engaging, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that make you think, challenge your beliefs, and inspire you to see the world in a different way. We read every single comment and truly value hearing from our viewers. So take a moment to share your thoughts, opinions, or even your personal stories. We can't wait to hear from you and keep this conversation going. Thanks for being part of our community.